The Sabra and Shatila massacre was the killing of between 762 and 3,500 civilians, mostly Palestinians and Lebanese Shiites, by a militia close to the Kataib Party, also called Phalange, a predominantly Christian Lebanese right-wing party in the Sabra neighborhood and the adjacent Shatila refugee camp in Beirut, Lebanon. From approximately 6 p.m. the 16th of September to 8 a.m. the 18th of September 1982, a widespread massacre was carried out by the militia virtually under the eyes of their Israeli allies. The Phalanges, allies to the Israeli Defense Forces, were ordered by the IDF to clear out Sabra and Shatila from PLO fighters. As a part of the IDF maneuvering into West Beirut, the IDF received reports of some of the Phalanges' atrocities in Sabra and Shatila but failed to stop them. The massacre was presented as retaliation for the assassination of newly elected Lebanese President Bashir Gemayel, the leader of the Lebanese Kataib Party. It was wrongly assumed that Palestinian militants had carried out the assassination. In June 1982, the Israel Defense Forces had invaded Lebanon with the intention of rooting out the Palestine Liberation Organization. By mid-1982, under the supervision of the multinational force, the PLO withdrew from Lebanon following weeks of battles in West Beirut and shortly before the massacre took place. Various forces, Israeli, Phalangists and possibly also the South Lebanon Army, were in the vicinity of Sabra and Shatila at the time of the slaughter, taking advantage of the fact that the multinational force had removed barracks and mines that had encircled Beirut's predominantly Muslim neighborhoods and kept the Israelis at bay during the Beirut siege. The Israeli advance over West Beirut in the wake of the PLO withdrawal, which enabled the Phalangist raid, was considered a violation of the ceasefire agreement between the various forces. The Israeli army surrounded Sabra and Shatila and stationed troops at the exits of the area to prevent camp residents from leaving them. At the Phalangists' request, fired illuminating flares at night. According to Al-Anman argues, the direct perpetrators of the killings were the young men, a gang recruited by Eli Hobaker, a prominent figure in the Phalanges, the Lebanese forces intelligence chief and liaison officer with Mossad, from men who had been expelled from the Lebanese forces for insubordination or criminal activities. The killings are widely believed to have taken place under Hobaker's direct orders. Hobaker's family and fiancé had been murdered by Palestinian militiamen and their Lebanese allies at the Damour massacre of 1976, itself a response to the 1976 Karantina massacre of Palestinians and Lebanese Muslims at the hands of Christian militants. Hobaker later became a long-serving member of the Parliament of Lebanon and served in several ministerial roles. Other Phalangist commanders involved were Joseph Ed from South Lebanon, Dir Banistar, head of the Phalangist military police, Michael Zewin, and Maroun Misgalani from East Beirut. In all, 300 to 400 militiamen were involved, including some from Saad Haddad's South Lebanon Army. In 1983, a commission chaired by Sean McBride, the assistant to the UN Secretary-General and President of United Nations General Assembly at the time, concluded that Israel, as the camp's occupying power, bore responsibility for the violence. The commission also concluded that the massacre was a form of genocide. In 1983, the Israeli Kahan Commission, appointed to investigate the incident, found that Israeli military personnel, aware that a massacre was in progress, had failed to take serious steps to stop it. The commission deemed Israel indirectly responsible, and Ariel Sharon, then defense minister, bore personal responsibility for ignoring the danger of bloodshed and revenge, forcing him to resign. Background: from 1975 to 1990, groups in competing alliances with neighboring countries fought against each other in the Lebanese civil war. Infighting and massacres between these groups claimed several thousand victims. Examples: the Syrian-backed Karantina massacre by the Kataib and its allies against Kurds. Syrians and Palestinians in this predominantly Muslim slum district of Beirut, demobbed by the PLO against Christian Maronites, including the family and fiancé of the Lebanese Forces intelligence chief Eli Hobaker, and Tel al-Zator by Phalangists and their allies against Palestinian refugees living in a camp administered by UNRWA. The total death toll in Lebanon for the whole civil war period was around 150,000 victims. The PLO had been attacking Israel from southern Lebanon, and Israel had been bombing PLO positions in southern Lebanon since the early 1970s till early 1980s. The casus belli cited by the Israeli side to declare war, however, was an assassination attempt, on 3 June 1982, made upon Israeli ambassador to Britain Shlomo Argov. The attempt was the work of the Iraq-based Abu Nidal, possibly with Syrian or Iraqi involvement. Historians and observers such as David Hurst and Benny Morris have commented that the PLO could not have been involved in the assault, or even approved of it. Abu Nidal's group was, after all, a bitter rival to Arafat's PLO and even murdered some of its members. The PLO also issued a condemnation of the attempted assassination of the Israeli ambassador. Nonetheless, Israel used the event as a justification to break the ceasefire with the PLO, and as a casus belli for a full-scale invasion of Lebanon. After the war, Israel presented its actions as a response to the terrorism being carried out by the PLO from several fronts, including from the border with Lebanon. However, the aforementioned historians have argued that the PLO was respecting the ceasefire agreement then in force with Israel and keeping the border between the Jewish state and Lebanon more stable than it had been for a period of over a decade. During that ceasefire, which lasted 8 months, UNIFIL, the UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon, reported that not a single act of provocation against Israel had been launched by the PLO. The Israeli government tried out several justifications to ditch the ceasefire and attack the PLO, at some point even eliciting accusations from the Israeli opposition that demagoguery from the government threatened to pull Israel into war. All such justifications, before the attempted assassination of the ambassador, had been shot down by its ally, the United States, as insufficient reason to launch a war against the PLO. On 6 June 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, moving northwards to surround the capital, Beirut. Following an extended siege of the city, the fighting was brought to an end with a U.S.-brokered agreement between the parties on 21 August 1982, which allowed for safe evacuation of the Palestinian fighters from the city under the supervision of Western nations and guaranteed the protection of refugees and the civilian residents of the refugee camps. On 15 June 1982, 10 days after the start of the invasion, the Israeli cabinet passed a proposal put forward by the Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, that the IDF should not enter West Beirut, but this should be done by Lebanese forces. Chief of Staff Raphael Eitan had already issued orders that the Lebanese predominantly Christian right-wing militias should not take part in the fighting, and the proposal was to counter public complaints that the IDF were suffering casualties, whilst their allies were standing by. The subsequent Israeli inquiry estimated the strength of militias in West Beirut, excluding Palestinians, to be around 7,000. They estimated the Phalange to be 5,000 when fully mobilized, of whom 2,000 were full-time. On 23 August 1982, Bachir Gemayel, leader of the right-wing Lebanese forces, was elected president of Lebanon by the National Assembly. Israel had relied on Gemayel and his forces as a counterbalance to the PLO, and as a result, ties between Israel and Maronite groups, from which hailed many of the supporters of the Lebanese forces, had grown stronger. By 1 September, the PLO fighters had been evacuated from Beirut under the supervision of multinational force. The evacuation was conditional on the continuation of the presence of the MNF to provide security for the community of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. 2 days later, the Israeli Premier Menahem Begin met Gemayel in Nahariya and strongly urged him to sign a peace treaty with Israel. According to some sources, Begin also wanted the continuing presence of the SLA in southern Lebanon in order to control attacks and violence, and action from Gemayel to move on the PLO fighters, which Israel believed remained a hidden threat in Lebanon. However, the Phalangists, who were previously united as reliable Israeli allies, were now split because of developing alliances with Syria, which remained militarily hostile to Israel. As such, Gemayel rejected signing a peace treaty with Israel and did not authorize operations to root out the remaining PLO militants. On the 11th of September 1982, the international forces that were guaranteeing the safety of Palestinian refugees left Beirut. Then on the 14th of September, Gemayel was assassinated in a massive explosion which demolished his headquarters. Eventually, the culprit, Habib Tanius Shartouni, a Lebanese Christian, confessed to the crime. He turned out to be a member of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party and an agent of Syrian intelligence. Palestinian and Lebanese Muslim leaders denied any connection to him. On the evening of the 14th of September, following the news that Bashir Gemayel had been assassinated, Prime Minister Begin, Minister for Defense Sharon and Chief of Staff Eitan agreed that the Israeli army should invade West Beirut. The public reason given was to be that they were there to prevent chaos. In a separate conversation, at 8:30 p.m. that evening, Sharon and Eitan agreed that the IDF should not enter the Palestinian refugee camps but that the Phalange should be used. The only other member of the cabinet who was consulted was Foreign Minister Yitzhak Shamir. Shortly after 6 a.m. the 15th of September, the Israeli army entered West Beirut. This Israeli action breached its agreement with the United States not to occupy West Beirut and was in violation of the ceasefire. Fawaz Trabulsi writes that while the massacre was presented as a reaction to the assassination of Bashir, it represented the posthumous achievement of his radical solution to Palestinians in Lebanon, who he thought of as people too many in the region. Later, the Israeli army's monthly journal Skira Hadichav wrote that the Lebanese forces hoped to provoke the general exodus of the Palestinian population, and aimed to create a new demographic balance in Lebanon favoring the Christians.